I am so excited to have the godmother of multilingual instruction, the one and only Dr. Margo Gotlieb is back on the podcast. You were the first person to be on my podcast, and you
I
have
was
changed.
honored, absolutely honored.
Well, the I am so honored for the work that you continually put out. There are, I would say, three educators that have consistently changed my practice. That's you, Jenna Chividia, and Andrea Hogginsfeld, who have like shown me a way and really shown us how to really work with multilinguals. And if everything can be summed up in Rita can be two words, can do. And that's what you have shown us that we can do great things with our students, and they are capable of greatness as well.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Can you share a story about assessing multilinguals?
Well, I don't know if this qualifies as a story.
Yes.
Back many, many years when I, in fact, was a graduate student, and it was time to do my dissertation. And I didn't want to take the traditional route. And what I did was ultimately design, develop, enact, analyze, interpret data from a multilingual test in Lao, English, and Spanish for a school district. And it was a whole team of people. We all got together. This was one of the first K-12 content-based language tests that ever came to be. And it solidified my commitment to making assessment theoretically sound, fair, meaningful, and useful for multilingual learners and their teachers. And I've kind of adhered to that can-do philosophy, and that it can be, in fact, created through assessment.
So
That's
tell
my
me, well, tell us more. You had me at Lao. Those are very different languages, Lao, Spanish, and English.
Well, at the time, I was working in a school district who had received federal funds. And half the population, it was 1,200 students, were from Laos. It was the second generation, I believe, Hmong and Lao. And Latino students had been there, Latinx students had been there, for a couple of generations. And there were also, English speakers. So, yeah,
Oh,
we combined them. And we also threw in a mix of students that had been identified with individual education programs or IEPs. So it was a whole potpourri and it worked.
and it worked. What do you think
It
made it work?
motivated me to keep on going.
What do you think made it work?
I think it was one, it was a team effort. Two, it had a very sound theoretical basis. At the time, I was operationalizing the then new Dr. Jim Cummings framework and the need for an assessment framework. So that's what I did. I said, I can do this. That's what I did.
So you mentioned the theoretical framework, and wow, Dr. Jim Cummings, the new Dr. Jim Cummings. Wow, that's many moons ago. So tell us
It
about,
was a long time ago. I've been in this field many a year.
and that's what I mean that you are the matriarch of our field. What was that framework that you said that the assessment, the way you approach assessing students is now sound theoretically? Can you talk about more about that?
I would say that I have always envisioned the integration of content and language. It has never been separate for me. It has always gone together for instruction and assessment. And the other piece that's been, I would say, so influential in my thinking is that instruction is assessment.
Ooh, instruction is assessment. We'll get to that. Assessment as for and of learning.
Well, that's what it's evolved into over the years, but I've always been a sound believer of embedding assessment within instruction.
So let's talk more about your book. Congratulations on your edition, your third edition of your book. This is fantastic. Called "Assessing Multilingual Learners: Bridges to Empowerment." Can you tell us about what motivated you to write this third one and what was different about it?
Well, There's three reasons, I think. The first one is I wanted to continue my plea to elevate the status of multilingual learners. That's been my my mantra. It just I want classroom assessment to accentuate, as you said, accentuate what students can do, rather than perpetuate this remedial deficit thinking that comes with so many measures and mandates. So that's the first reason. I didn't want to just kind of retire from the assessment world saying I've done it. No, work is still needed. I wanted to push the field of language expectation to go beyond equity. I think equity has become so pervasive in education, it's almost rendered meaningless. So I really wanted to bring in the notion of empowerment, in order to embrace multilingual learners and educators, give them opportunities to really develop autonomy and agency. Those are the two kind of watchwords of empowerment. And then my third reason is I like to keep on exploring. I have this curiosity of always investigating the newest theories and research and practice and how it can apply to assessment, because oftentimes it just stops with instructional strategies. And so I always try to incorporate that into assessment, classroom assessment in particular.
Well, when you keep exploring, because then that'll lead to your writing, and as you write, we learn so much from you.
Thank you.
Can you tell us more about that part where you talked about like it's not just stops at instruction and doesn't go further? Like, why isn't it so important to really think understanding by design and thinking about assessments?
In terms of looking at assessment as in a backward design matter?
Yeah, like why did you write a book specifically about assessing and not just instruction?
Because I hope when people read it, they'll see that instruction is very much a part of assessment. And I emphasize assessment because teachers always want to know the next tool in their toolbox. And I wanted to show them there's a whole bunch of tools out there that haven't been tapped. And along with assessment, there's this complement called instruction, and you seem to be very familiar with instruction. All you have to do is document a learning target, document what students are learning, and you've moved into assessment. It isn't this mysterious box that needs to be unpacked.
And so you're demystifying. You demystified language instruction for multilingual learners with WIDA, but now you continue to demystify assessing for us.
I try. Anyway.
You do an excellent job at it. How can we empower MLs and teachers through assessments?
I think the first thing you have to do is create a very safe, welcoming, trusting learning environment for students. If they don't feel secure in their learning environment, if they feel that they are inhibited in their language use, they're not going to be able to learn. Or they're going to be able to learn minimally and not achieve their optimal point of learning. It just won't happen. There has to be this mutual respect. There has to be freedom to explore for our students. It means giving students choices. And so many times we're looking at structure that is very pointed, that is very lockstep, and we don't think about our students as people. We think of them more as robots, that if you in the traditional sense, you give them the input and they'll be able to give you output. No, they need to process, they need to think, they need to reason. And in order to have that empowerment, they have to be given some kind of options so they can pursue their own learning through their own pathways.
I didn't see that part about options differentiation in the table of contents, but would you tell me more about that? Can you give an example of like, how can we give students more options in assessments?
Oh, gosh, you can do it through any way. I didn't speak to that because I've really thought through this notion of supports and scaffolding. And on one, and there's so many ways of approaching it. I'd like to see it through multimodalities. And the choice is for them multimodal. That is, they are to reach the same goal as all students. They are to pursue the same project as all students, but they can select their own pathway where they think they will be most, that'll be most advantageous for them. So they could do it visually, they can do it kinesthetically, they can do it through music or art or drawing, as long as they are meeting their learning targets and are aware of criteria for success. To me, that's what's so critical in classrooms.
So you're saying that it's the content stays the same, maybe the process might change, but the product definitely is where the students have the most choice. That's where the differentiation happens.
The product is the same because to create a common assessment that can give you data that have some usability for accountability beyond a classroom. I'm thinking of that too. There's so many different types of assessment. For the most part, I've centered on classroom assessment, but there's assessment across classrooms that can be through a common product. So the product is the same, the criteria for success are the same, but the pathways to get to that product are distinguished for individual multilingual learners or groups of multilingual learners.
Right, that makes sense. So the process might be different, different paths to get there, but the product is the same, and the product is multimodal, so that students can have choice in there. There's a singular product.
The product, yes, hopefully is multimodal. Yes. The pathways for sure are multimodal.
Yes, and multiliteracy. Can you talk more about that and multilingualism? Like, how can if the product is the same, common assessments, but then talk about.
It doesn't have to be, but I'm just speaking in general. Right. Assessment is still pretty complex.
Yeah, it is. It is. That's why you devoted the book. So let's talk about that, multiliteracies and multilingualism of us incorporating that into assessments.
Okay, so multiliteracies is this umbrella concept that was born out of the New London Group in 1996, but it hasn't gotten a lot of traction. Why? I don't know, but it entails the recognition of this hyperdiversity of multilingual learners worldwide. It isn't just confined to the United States, worldwide, coupled with this tremendous explosion of technology. So you can imagine 1996 was just the coming of the World Wide Web. And they were very, they had the foresight to see that this technology is really going to change our educational spheres and our entire way of living. So that's multiliteracies. Within multiliteracies are these multimodalities. So multimodalities always starts with text. But in literacy, we become so text dependent that we need to open the doors to realize that students can make meaning through multiple, the fancy word be semiotic means, but in multiple ways. And that's where multimodalities comes in. It really looks at communicating not only through text, through oral language development, through social and emotional development, and through the means I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago. If students prefer to put on a play, or students want to do a multimedia presentation or create an iMovie, as long as they reach the agreed upon target for learning, it should be an acceptable route to take. And finally, encapsulated within multiliteracies and multimodalities is this notion of multilingualism, which is really part and parcel, part of our multilingual learners' identity. You can't take it away from them. They are multilingual. And so we have to capitalize on their, the resources that they bring. So much of the literature addresses this.
Can you give us an example of an assessment that you have seen, or as you work with teachers, where there's this multi-literacies, multi-modalities, and multilingualism all incorporated together? So teachers see like a visual of that.
I think that teachers currently are incorporating multi-literacies within multimodalities. So it's a given that multilingual learners are very much a part of the educational scene, and they're not going away. When I just started my educational career, I was a full-time basis sub because, in fact, the multilingual population was just going to dissipate and who knows what. Um, so all these years later, I'm still advocating for multilingualism and multiculturalism, which is wonderful. I'm glad. I think we're making some inroads. So multiliteracies, although I don't think has been widely embraced by the educational community as yet, we are moving towards assessment in multimodalities. And that's where technology is gaining more and more ground. So I would combine those two in the real world right now. And multilingualism, we've seen the growth of dual language programs. We've seen how translanguaging has become part of language and assessment policy, minimally in classrooms, hopefully in grades and schools and districts.
When you talk about multiliteracies, is that like different types of literacy? What does that look like?
That also includes visual literacy, assessment literacy, media literacy, numerical literacy, financial literacy. We're surrounded by different kinds of literacies, and they need to be acknowledged and embedded within curriculum. Yes.
Okay, that makes
That's
sense.
also a piece of multiliteracy.
Right. You talked about before. I think um we missed the opportunity to ask this really important question, which is um provide. Can you talk about assessment as learning, for learning, and of learning, which you have really like founded for us. You have shared it with the world.
Okay, I've shared it, but I have not founded it. I'm a strong believer because for me, and I think this is a unique aspect that I've brought to the field, is that assessment as for of learning are not substitutes for formative and summative assessment. There are likenesses, it's complementary, but the number one concept behind assessment as for of learning for me is relationship building and recognizing the people involved in the process of assessment and not looking only at outcomes, making assessment the goal for learning and not part of scoring or numbers or letters or percentiles, where that decontextualized information because it's coming from the interaction of people. So that's the number one, to me, important difference. So let's start with assessment of learning, because I think that's the easiest, and that's one we've sort of touched on already. Assessment of learning is the accumulation of knowledge over time. It might be equated with, quote, summative, but it doesn't have to be, because for me, every time we're assessing student, it is of a summative nature, because that's what a student has learned up to date. So formatively, everything you've done is also formative because you would hope to give feedback to anything a student is providing you. So to me, those are very blurry terms that were originally designed by someone I took a course from, believe it or not, years ago, is Scriven, and it applied to evaluation, not to assessment. So let's clear that deck. With assessment as learning, we center multilingual learners because it's the interaction between and among students, what they're learning from each other, I'm going to go then to a for learning. Then I'll go back to of learning. For learning is that relationship building between teachers and students, where teachers are a guide. With assessment as learning, teachers are more facilitators, and students are the drivers of their own learning. And it takes time. That's why I say it could be under a summative guise. With for learning, for example, students might have conferences with teachers on a quarterly basis. I think you've even written to something of that effect. So the teachers are really helping students better understand how they're learning, when they're learning, what they're learning, and creating the next steps for learning with them. So it's a partnership. And of learning is that final project. It's looking at those criteria of success that are generally created by teachers or professional learning communities or grade level clusters or department, because they are anchored in standards. And it's still in the United States, they're anchored in standards that may or may not be student friendly. And as learning, the students are reaching goals lesson by lesson, although it can also be incorporated. For learning, we're looking more at a task level. So we are scaffolding lessons, related lessons. And in of learning, we're taking those tasks to come up with a project or a product. So one example could be a school-wide campaign. It doesn't have to be a classroom. So the school-wide campaign might be, let's revamp our cafeteria. And every grade level takes their own little project within that overall campaign. So younger students might create a mural and describe it. Older students might pursue new vendors for food services because they really don't like the food that's served, and they want to make sure the food is coming from minority vendors and that it's reflective of their languages and cultures. Students, kind of in the middle, can create a marketing plan for how to address it, going to the PTA if there is a PTA, or to a community group, or going out to the community. So it becomes an all school effort. That would, to me, would be project-based learning. Some students could go and interview family members as well. What would they prefer? Students can voice their own opinions, create a survey, analyze the data. So it becomes multidisciplinary, multidimensional, multifaceted. And that results in deep learning. And assessment is part of it. It isn't the Friday afternoon test. Sorry.
It's not the Friday afternoon test. That's right. It's every day through interactions. As I was listening to you talk about as, for, and of, I was really hearing like the relationship in all of that, meaning like assessing the goal. One of the goals of assessing is to develop a relationship with students. Like we understand them better. They are empowered to make decisions as
that's it.
Right. It's a very interesting perspective that I've never heard before, where it's like relationship building,
it's relationship building, and it's humanizing assessment.
Yes, that's a better
making it a human endeavor, not a number.
Yes. Would you talk about a dynamic student assessment systems?
Okay. We can look at it through multiple lenses. So there's an overall assessment system. Let's say it's a macro system. It could be, you can use it starting at a federal level, or it could be a district level assessment here in the US. And it has certain stipulations and certain constraints that everybody must comply to. And that's fine, but we don't go far enough. We also have to think about these mesosystems. That is, districts in and of themselves have control over some assessment. Many districts, for example, will implement what's called an interim assessment. They'll choose an office an off-the-shelf test and say, well, in order to predict how students will do in either language proficiency assessment or achievement, we need to also initiate, this assessment 2 or 3 times a year, and that's going to help us predict how kids will do. Fine. But that's the prerogative of districts. Doesn't have to be that way. And then there's a little micro system, and that could be at a school or classroom level. And we can make a difference through microsystems if we band together. If we say that student assessment should be part of the overall accountability system, we shouldn't have to rely on just one form of assessment, but really think about multiple sources that are going to make a difference for the education of multilingual learners. So that, in a nutshell, to me, are the systems that have to be synchronized. They have to be aligned. But you have to recognize there's multiple systems that are always being enacted.
It seems like newcomers are a really big focus for a lot of schools and teachers because they pose the most immediate need. Do you have any thoughts about what teachers can do to assess multilingual learners who are new to English?
One contingency is, are they literate in their other language? Even if they're not, you can expose them to resources in their other language and culture so they feel comfortable. So they can listen to them, so they can see, videos on YouTube. There's, in today's educational realm, there's so much available to teachers that they can screen for multilingual learners in any language. It doesn't matter whether the teachers themselves are familiar with that language, whether it be Macedonian or Urdu or, Spanish, Mandarin. It doesn't matter. Karen, the state of Illinois has 250 languages. You don't expect teachers to be proficient in them, but they can access those resources. And that's the value of having newcomers there to, one, pair with another mentor, a buddy of that same language group. That's easy. If there's newcomers, there's also community members of that language to bring the community into the school or tap those resources in the community. There should be organizations that are readily available to newcomers and their families. It takes a little digging, but it's well worth it. And again, multimodalities. You don't expect a 5-paragraph essay from a newcomer. It isn't going to happen. So what can they do? Not diluting the curriculum, but using the same concepts, but your evidence for learning is distinguished by the mode that they choose.
There goes that phrase again. What can they do?
Mm-hmm. Right.
In our final 5 minutes, can you talk about what are suggestions for assessment design and grading best practices?
If, in fact, you're subject to grading, which many people are, it's got to be fair. It's got to be equitable. It has to have student voice, and it should be negotiated between students and teachers. One thing that I personally would say would not impact grades, for example, would be homework. Homework is time to practice language and content. It's not time to be graded on content and language. I would not include motivation or participation. All those affective variables, yes, you might write a little narrative to that, but it should impact a student's grade. If you're an older multilingual learner, you could be caring for younger siblings. You could be working a 20-hour job a week and be exhausted. Take students' individual characteristics into account when you grade. That would be my piece of advice. Every student is an individual with their own histories, and that should be part of the equation, not whether they attend school, because it may not be feasible in some cases. So you as a teacher have to be empathetic. Grading when it happens, I would hope would be much more a standards reference than using quote an average. An average of what? And what does it, based on these numbers again, where's the context for learning? We don't know it. And what does it mean? And what do you do next? Doesn't help. So if it's clued into criteria for success that in fact are derivative from standards, then you have a pathway that you can follow to move learning forward.
Well, Margo, Dr. Margo Gotlieb, it's been so lovely to talk to you. Let's close out this podcast with what do you recommend? What do you ask teachers to stop doing, start doing, and keep doing in terms of working, assessing multilinguals? That stop, red light, yellow light, keep doing, and green light, start doing.
With green, you and your students can achieve so much together, which would be assessment for learning. To me, that would epitomize how multilingual learners and their teachers get to know each other, trust each other, rely on each other, empathize with each other, share with each other, and understand each other. So green means get to know the student the best you can. Yellow is sometimes there's going to be constraints put on you as a teacher. I realize teachers are overworked. I realize there's initiative of the day. I understand. I've been in that classroom. And sometimes you don't have that agency as a teacher. You should, but you don't. So the yellow light is just be aware. Be aware of those mandates. Be aware of the new initiative. What does it mean for multilingual learners? So that's where the stop would come in. Stop thinking that we have to do this and multilingual learners haven't been part of this decision-making process. You need to represent your multilingual learners. You need to advocate on their behalf. And you need to show that you can make a difference as an individual teacher, as a group of teachers devoted to your craft of multilingual education. The stop is you don't have to stop with a mandate or with some constraint that's been put on you, but you can maneuver your educational prowess so that you are representing multilingual learners, you're advocating for multilingual learners, you are aware of what is being imposed upon you, but you go beyond that to become empowered.
What a beautiful way to end. You turned a stop to a go. You you're saying let's use our craft to think about what students can do, and let's go beyond our limitations. And you have continually have done that in my life, in my career, and you can
Oh,
do
I'm
that.
gonna cry. I hope you don't know.
And you do that for our field. So we are indebted. We are in a debt that we can never pay. And so we are forever your student, and we're so grateful, Dr. Margo Gotlieb, for your work. Wishing you many, many more years. I know that you have many more books coming on the pipeline, so we're excited to have you back anytime.
And Tan, it's always such a pleasure to talk with you. You were truly an educator to the core, so dedicated to your craft.
That's only made better because of your work.
Oh my heavens, thank you.